She can't even balance a checkbook, Your Honor, she cried for 3 days when the cable bill was late. My mother's estate needs someone responsible, and with all due respect, my niece is simply not that person. My uncle said it without a single tremor in his voice. He sat across the conference table from me in the Williamson County Probate Mediator's office, wearing the gold cufflinks my mother had given my father as a wedding gift 31 years ago. She had been dead for 4 months. He had been wearing those cufflinks for 2. I did not look away. I did not cry. I pressed my thumbnail into my palm under the table and counted backward from 20, 17, 16, 15. Let me ask you something honest. Have you ever sat in a room and watched someone you've known your entire life describe you as broken, knowing that the only reason they need you to be broken is so they can take everything you have left? Drop a comment if you know that feeling, because I need to know I'm not the only one who has sat in that chair. My mother, Carol Ann Mercer, died on a Tuesday in October, ovarian cancer. She fought it for 14 months with the kind of quiet, organized dignity that defined every single thing she did in her 62 years on this earth. She was a retired paralegal. She kept paper files on everything. Her grocery lists had subcategories. When she was diagnosed, she updated her will within the week, organized her financial records into labeled folders, and wrote me a 4-page letter that she sealed with wax and left in the fireproof box in her bedroom closet. I found the letter the morning after her funeral. I read it 3 times before I understood what she was warning me about. She wrote, "Watch your uncle. Not because he is evil, because he is weak, and weak men do dangerous things when money is involved." My uncle had always been at the edge of our lives, present enough to feel like family, distant enough that you never quite trusted him. My father passed when I was 19, a heart attack on a job site in Murfreesboro, and after that my uncle showed up more. At first I thought it was grief. Later I understood it was reconnaissance. My mother's estate was not enormous by any stretch, but it was real. A paid-off house in Franklin, Tennessee, worth somewhere around $400,000 in today's market. A savings account with just over $90,000. A life insurance policy with a death benefit of $250,000, naming me as sole beneficiary. For a man who had spent 30 years making bad investments and borrowing money he never quite paid back, my mother's estate was a fortune. He arrived at the house 3 days after the funeral with his wife, my aunt, and 2 suitcases. He said he was worried about me being alone. He said he wanted to help with the estate paperwork. He said my mother would have wanted it. I let him stay, not because I believed him, because I needed to see what he was going to do next. Here is what my uncle did not know about me. He thought I worked in insurance. Technically, he was right. What he didn't know was that my specific role, the one I had held for 6 years at a regional firm out of Brentwood, was special investigations, fraud detection. I spent my days reviewing claims that didn't add up, pulling financial records, interviewing witnesses, and building case files that our legal team handed to prosecutors. I had helped put 11 people in federal court. 2 of them had been close family friends of senior partners who thought the connection would protect them. It never does. My uncle was not a sophisticated man. He was a desperate one, and desperate men leave trails because they are too busy grabbing to notice what they are dropping. Within the first 2 weeks, I caught him in 3 lies. He told me he had spoken to my mother's financial advisor, a man named Gerald at an Edward Jones office in Brentwood, and that Gerald had recommended liquidating her savings account into something with better returns. Gerald had done no such thing. I called Gerald myself the next morning. Gerald had not spoken to my uncle at all. My uncle had simply called the office, asked for account information, been denied, and then come home and invented a conversation. The second lie was smaller but more telling. He told me a collection of my mother's jewelry had been appraised and was basically worthless. I found the appraisal receipt in the trash under a coffee filter. The appraiser had valued the collection at $11,000. My uncle had already sold 3 pieces to an estate buyer in Antioch for $4,400 cash. The third lie was the one that told me exactly what kind of game we were playing. He sat me down one evening, his wife beside him on the couch with her hands folded the way people fold their hands when they have rehearsed what they are about to say, and he told me that he was worried about my mental health. He said I had been forgetful, erratic, that I had cried in front of the mailman, that I had called him twice in one night confused about what day it was. None of it happened. Not one word. But he said it with such practiced, gentle concern that if I had not known exactly what it meant, I might have doubted myself. I recognized the architecture immediately. I had seen it before in fraud cases, the kind where someone needs to neutralize a witness before the witness figures out they're a witness. You don't threaten them, you make them seem unreliable. You plant seeds, quietly, with everyone around them, until the person themselves starts to wonder if something is wrong with them. My uncle wasn't worried about me. My uncle needed me to appear unstable before I figured out what he was doing. So I smiled. I told him I appreciated his concern. I told him the grief was hard and I was doing my best. I let his wife pat my hand. I went upstairs to my old childhood bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, opened my laptop, and started building a file. I told no one. Not my best friend, not my therapist, not Gerald the financial advisor who had started to suspect something himself. I went to family dinners at my uncle's house and helped clear the plates. I texted my aunt heart emojis. I let my uncle walk me through my mother's financial documents like he was doing me a favor, and every time he explained something incorrectly or redirected me away from a particular folder, I noted it in a private document on an encrypted drive that I kept in my car. For 3 months, I documented timestamps, screenshots, voicemails I saved without telling him I was saving them. I pulled the deed records for the house. I checked with the probate court on whether any filings had been made I wasn't aware of. I cross-referenced my mother's account statements with the dates my uncle had been alone in the house. He had forged my signature on a change of address form that was rerouting my mother's financial mail to a P.O. box in Smyrna. He had submitted a request to my mother's insurance company to update the beneficiary designation on her life insurance policy. The request had been flagged and denied because it lacked proper notarization, but he had tried. He had tried to replace my name with his. He had also, and this was the one that made me set my coffee down very slowly and stare at the wall for a long time, begun meeting with an attorney. I found the billing record by accident. He had left his email open on the shared family laptop and walked out of the room, and the subject line was impossible to miss. Mercer Estate, Guardianship Petition, Initial Consult. Guardianship. He wasn't just trying to take the money. He was trying to have me legally declared incapacitated so that the court would hand him control of everything my mother had left me. With a guardianship in place, he wouldn't need to forge anything. He would have legal authority. He could sell the house, liquidate the accounts, redirect the insurance payout, and do all of it with a judge's blessing, as long as I appeared too unstable to manage my own affairs. That was the plan. First, discredit me with the family, then discredit me with a doctor, then walk into a courtroom with a physician's report and a sad, concerned expression and ask a judge to save me from myself. The physician's report came 6 weeks later. A man named Dr. Aldous Pryor, a semi-retired psychiatrist whose license I looked up on the Tennessee Department of Health database the same afternoon my uncle mentioned him, submitted an evaluation to the probate court stating that I exhibited signs of major depressive disorder with significant cognitive impairment, affecting my ability to manage financial decisions. Dr. Pryor listed his evaluation method as a telephone interview conducted at the request of a family member. He had never met me. He had never seen me. He had spoken to my uncle on the phone, listened to a list of symptoms my uncle invented, and signed a document that would be used in a court of law to strip me of my legal autonomy. I added his name to the file with its own tab, Lime Green, for the medical board complaint I was already drafting in my head. The petition was filed on a Thursday in March. I was served at my mother's house, the house I was still living in, by a process server who handed me an envelope and looked at the ground while I opened it. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out in front of a probate judge named the Honorable Patricia Dawes. I called my attorney that afternoon. I had hired her 2 months earlier, quietly, through a referral from a colleague at work who specialized in estate litigation. She was sharp and short, and she wore the same pearl earrings every single day, and when I walked into her office and slid a flash drive across her desk and said, "I've been building this for 93 days, she plugged it in, read for 11 minutes, and then looked up at me and said, "He has no idea what he's walked into." "No," I said, "he doesn't." The morning of the hearing, I wore a charcoal blazer and my mother's silver watch, not to perform anything, because she would have worn it, and I wanted her there with me in the only way that was still possible. The conference room at the courthouse was smaller than I expected. Judge Dawes sat at the head of the table, not on a bench, because guardianship hearings in Tennessee are often handled in mediation format before escalating to full court. My uncle was already seated when I arrived. His wife was beside him. His attorney, a man named Fletcher Boyd, who had a habit of clicking his pen in sets of 3, sat to his left. My uncle looked at me when I came in with the expression he had been practicing for months. Worried, tired. A man carrying a burden he never asked for. He shook his head just barely, just enough for the room to see, as if my presence itself confirmed everything he had alleged. I sat down, placed my bag on the floor, and folded my hands on the table. I looked directly at my uncle for exactly 4 seconds, long enough for him to know I was not confused, long enough for him to wonder what I knew. Then I looked at Judge Dawes and smiled. Fletcher Boyd opened. He laid out the petition with the fluency of a man who had done this before, which he had. I had researched him too. He painted a picture of a grieving young woman, overwhelmed by loss, unequipped for the responsibilities of a significant estate, increasingly isolated and erratic, in need of a stable guiding hand. He presented Dr. Pryor's evaluation. He presented 3 affidavits from relatives who had signed statements attesting to my concerning behavior, 2 of whom I had not spoken to in years, and one of whom, a second cousin in Memphis, I was fairly certain had never met my mother. My uncle testified. His voice was steady and warm in the way that men who have practiced being steady and warm always sound. He described calling me and finding me incoherent. He described watching me leave the stove on. He described a conversation in which I allegedly told him I did not know what to do with the money and asked him to just handle everything. That conversation had never happened. When he finished, Judge Dawes looked at me. "Miss Mercer, you have the right to respond. Would you like to do so?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "I would." I reached into my bag and placed a dark blue binder on the table. It was 1.5 inches thick, tabbed with 4 colors. I had printed everything and organized it the way I organized claim files at work, which is to say, the way that made it impossible for a reasonable person to misunderstand. "I'd like to begin with the insurance policy," I said. Fletcher looked up. "My mother's life insurance policy with Keystone Mutual designates me as sole beneficiary. On February 9th of this year, a written request was submitted to Keystone Mutual asking that the beneficiary designation be changed to my uncle." I opened the red tab and slid a copy toward Judge Dawes. The request was denied because it lacked proper notarization and the required wet signature of the policyholder, who was, at that point, deceased. I have the denial letter here, as well as the original submission, which was mailed from a P.O. box in Smyrna, Tennessee. That P.O. box was opened on January 14th. I looked at my uncle. 12 days after my mother's funeral. His wife touched his arm. His jaw tightened. I'd also like to address the change of address form filed with the U.S. Postal Service redirecting my mother's financial correspondence. I turned to the blue tab. This form bears a signature purported to be mine. I have had that signature analyzed by a certified document examiner whose report is included in this binder. Her conclusion is that the signature is not consistent with my known handwriting samples, which I have also provided. The letter formation, pen pressure, and baseline angle are measurably different. I paused. My signature was forged on a federal form. That is a federal crime. The pen clicking style. "I'd like to address Dr. Pryor's evaluation," I continued, turning to the yellow tab. My voice was even. I had practiced being even. "Dr. Pryor states in his report that he conducted a telephone interview to assess my cognitive and emotional functioning. I would like to note for the record that I was never contacted by Dr. Pryor. I received no phone call, no email, no letter. I was never interviewed. I looked at Judge Dawes directly. "Dr. Pryor evaluated a description of me provided by my uncle over the phone and then signed a clinical document without ever speaking to the person he was diagnosing. I have submitted a formal complaint to the Tennessee Department of Health, Division of Health-Related Boards. That complaint, along with Dr. Pryor's license history, which includes 1 prior disciplinary action in 2019 for improper documentation practices, is behind the yellow tab." My uncle's attorney leaned over and said something in a low voice. My uncle shook his head. His wife had stopped looking at me entirely. "The affidavits," I said, "are next." I turned to the green tab. 3 family members submitted statements alleging they had personally witnessed my erratic behavior. I have here phone records showing that 2 of those individuals, my uncle's first cousin and her husband, had no documented contact with me in the 14 months preceding my mother's death. The 3rd affidavit, signed by a relative in Memphis, contains a description of an event that allegedly took place at my mother's house on a specific Saturday in January. I let that sit for a moment. I have my cell phone location data from that Saturday. I was in Knoxville for a work training from Friday through Sunday. I was not in Franklin. I was not at that house. The event described in the affidavit did not occur because I was not there. The room was quiet in a way that rooms get quiet when the air has changed, and everyone can feel it, but no one wants to be the first to acknowledge it. My uncle looked at his attorney. Fletcher Boyd was looking at the binder with the expression of a man rapidly reassessing every assumption he had made about this case. Finally, I said, I want to address the financial management concerns raised in the petition. I didn't open another tab. I just spoke. My mother's estate is currently intact. Every account is in its original institution. The house has not been encumbered. The insurance claim has not yet been processed because the beneficiary dispute triggered a hold, which will be released when this petition is resolved. I have continued to pay the property taxes, the utilities, and the insurance premium on the house from my own income. I have not touched a single dollar of my mother's money. I looked at my uncle. Can you say the same? His head turned toward me slowly. Because I have documentation of the sale of 3 pieces of my mother's jewelry to an estate reseller in Antioch on November 22nd. Cash transaction. $4,400. Jewelry that was appraised at $11,000. Jewelry that was removed from my mother's home without my knowledge or consent. I slid the last document across the table. That is theft from an estate. Under Tennessee Code annotated 3914114, that is a Class D felony. My uncle stood up. Those were gifts. She gave those to me before she. Sit down, Judge Dawes said. Her voice was not loud. It was the kind of voice that does not need to be loud because it carries the weight of 40 years of authority in every syllable. He sat. She looked at Fletcher. Mr. Boyd, did you have knowledge of the affidavit discrepancies before filing this petition? Fletcher's complexion was doing something complicated. Your Honor, I relied on the information provided by my client. If there are inconsistencies in the submitted, I am asking you a direct question. Fletcher did not answer directly, which was, itself, an answer. Judge Dawes looked at my uncle for a long time. He looked back at her the way a man looks when he knows the story he was telling has just collided with a story that is better documented. Mr. Mercer, she said, this court finds no credible evidence of cognitive impairment or financial incapacity on the part of the respondent. The petition for guardianship is denied. She set down her reading glasses. Furthermore, this court is referring the matter of the forged postal form to the United States Postal Inspection Service and the matter of the estate jewelry to the Williamson County District Attorney's Office. The question of whether fraudulent affidavits were submitted to this proceeding will be a matter for that office to determine. She paused. Doctor, Pryor's conduct in submitting a clinical evaluation without conducting an actual examination will also be referred to the Tennessee Board of Medical Examiners. She looked at my uncle one final time. I strongly suggest you retain separate counsel, Mr. Mercer, and not Mr. Boyd. My uncle's wife was crying, not the kind of crying that comes from sadness, the kind that comes from suddenly understanding that the plan did not work. In the hallway afterward, my uncle tried to speak to me. He took a step toward me and opened his mouth, and I watched the words fail to form. You set this up, he finally said, not angry, hollow. You knew the whole time. I built a file, I said. There's a difference. I walked out into the pale March afternoon and stood on the courthouse steps and breathed in the cold Tennessee air and felt something in my chest that I had been holding for 4 months. Finally, carefully, release. The investigation took 8 months to complete. My uncle was charged with theft from an estate, forgery of a federal document, and filing a fraudulent petition with intent to deceive a court. His wife was named as a person of interest in the estate jewelry sale and eventually accepted a plea agreement to avoid charges by cooperating fully and repaying the $4,400 plus interest to the estate. My uncle took a plea on the theft and forgery counts. 14 months of probation, restitution, and a permanent public record that anyone who searches his name will find within 3 seconds. Fletcher Boyd was reported to the Tennessee Board of Professional Responsibility. The inquiry found that he had failed to adequately verify the affidavits before filing. He received a formal reprimand. It is in his record now, too. Dr. Pryor lost his license. Not just the complaint I filed. It turned out I was not the first person he had done this for. The Board of Medical Examiners found 3 prior instances of clinical documentation submitted without proper examination. He had been doing favors for people who paid him in referrals and golf invitations, and the comfortable illusion that what he was doing was a gray area. It was not a gray area. He should have known that. He had a medical degree that said he knew that. The insurance hold was released. The estate was settled. I kept the house for 7 more months before deciding that living in it without my mother felt more like haunting than living. And I sold it to a young couple from Ohio who were relocating for work. I used the proceeds to pay off my student loans, establish a small investment account in my mother's name, that I donate the interest from annually to an ovarian cancer research foundation at Vanderbilt, and put a down payment on a house in East Nashville that has a back porch where I can sit with my coffee in the mornings and listen to the neighborhood wake up. I went back to work. My colleagues knew something had happened. They did not know what, because I had not told them. But people who investigate fraud for a living develop a sensitivity to the way cases follow a person home, and they gave me space when I needed it, and coffee when I didn't, and that was exactly right. My uncle called me once, 2 months after the plea, from a number I recognized. I almost didn't pick up. I picked up. "I want you to know," he said, "that your mother would be disappointed in how you handled this." I sat with that for a moment. The audacity of it, the sheer, breathtaking audacity. "My mother warned me about you," I said, "in a letter, the morning after her funeral. She told me to watch you, not because she thought you were dangerous, because she thought you were weak." I paused. She was right on both counts. I ended the call. I blocked the number. Somewhere around that time, I started talking to a therapist, something I had been putting off since my mother's diagnosis because I had told myself there wasn't time, and because the honest reason, the one I could only admit in that small, quiet office, was that I was afraid of what I would feel if I slowed down long enough to feel it. My therapist asked me once whether I had been angry during those 3 months of building my file, whether sitting across from my uncle at dinner and watching him steal had cost me something. I told her the truth. I told her I had been terrified, that I woke up at 4 in the morning 3 times a week, certain I had missed something, certain he would find out, certain no one would believe me when it was over. I told her that being a fraud investigator by profession did not make me immune to doubt. It just meant I had a vocabulary for it. I knew what I was doing even when I was afraid I couldn't do it. She said, "That's not fearlessness. That's something better." I think about my mother often. I think about her letter, 4 pages in her careful paralegal handwriting, the wax seal she pressed with the little daisy stamp she kept in her desk drawer. I think about the fact that she saw what was coming and she trusted me to see it too. She did not warn me because she thought I was weak. She warned me because she knew I was capable of doing something about it, and she wanted me to have enough time. I go to her grave on her birthday and on the anniversary of the day she died, and sometimes on random Tuesdays when the need to be near her gets loud enough that I cannot reason my way through it. The cemetery is small, on the south edge of Franklin, and there is a dogwood tree nearby that blooms every April in the particular pale pink color that she always pointed out when it appeared on the drive to church. I sit on the grass and I tell her things. I told her about the hearing. I told her about the letter from the medical board. I told her about the Ohio couple who bought the house and how they had repainted the kitchen a warm yellow that she would have loved and hated simultaneously. I told her I was okay. I am, mostly. Grief does not resolve the way a case does. There is no binder you can close on it, no final tab, no referral to a higher authority that wraps it up and sends it forward. You carry it, and it gets lighter, and on the days when it doesn't, you sit on the grass under a dogwood tree and talk to someone who can no longer talk back, but who somehow still manages to make you feel less alone. I don't share this story because I want sympathy. I have enough of my own to work through without borrowing more. I share it because somewhere right now, someone is reading a document they were never supposed to see, or hearing a description of themselves that was designed to make them doubt their own mind, or watching someone they trusted take something that was never theirs to take. You are not crazy. The fog they are trying to create is manufactured. And the clearest thing you can do in a manufactured fog is document everything before it settles. They are counting on your grief to make you slow. They are counting on your love to make you hesitate. They are counting on the fact that you would rather believe the best about people than accept that someone you shared a last name with is capable of this. Start the file. Tell no one. Be the person they forgot to be afraid of. The quietest person in the room is not always the weakest one. Sometimes she is the one with 93 days of documentation and a dark blue binder and the particular kind of patience that only comes from deciding that being afraid is not the same as being wrong. She played to the family. I played to the evidence. One of those things lasts.